us. But very excited to talk to you today about digital opportunities. So we are reinventing ourselves in many ways as a digital company. And what I like to talk about is opportunities in life sciences and in R&D. And just as we go through this, please think about partnerships, because this is something I want to get onto. It's not a very technical discussion. You'll see that it's going to be fairly high level, but it might kind of generate some ideas of where we could work together. So my email is chris.foley@ge.com. Very easy. Right, so what I'd like to get into is why are we doing digital innovation with imaging agents? How are we going to do that? What can we leverage? What does the ecosystem look like? And what are the biggest things that could come out of it? So I think this connects with some of the other talks earlier very nicely, both on disruption aspects, but also on things like computer-aided diagnosis. So just to give you a very quick background, so the imaging agent development pathway is very similar to a therapeutic development pathway, where you have quite a long project life cycle, right from idea creation to launch of a project after clinical trials, and then maybe looking at phase 4, clinical utility, etc. So this can be something like a 10, 15-year process in some cases, but it's the mechanism that we have to follow. This is some rigid constraints. The aspects that we actually invoke can change. Maybe we can in-license products, for example. So you can sort of speed up this process through collaboration and that sort of avenue as well, of course. This is a very large business, expected to grow to something on the order of $6 billion by 2022. So it's one that is worth looking at. What digital opportunities should we pursue to not be disrupted, to entice more customers? So a quick example, just very, very quick, on Visimel, one of our products is, you can see here, this is an example of the development pipeline taking on the order of 15 years to come through, and we're at a stage now where we're still really in partnering with pharma companies and continuing clinical research. So it's a long process. But what do we get out of it? We get out of it some very interesting things. So, of course, we run clinical trials as part of this, which means we have to standardize how data is collected. We have to bring in nice, clean, effective data. We have to characterize all of that data, put it through quality control, eventually put it through image analysis, and then report on it. And of course, over that 15 years, you end up having some pretty decent, high-quality data sets that are well characterized. Not too surprising, we head towards things like machine learning, things like digital products out of this. Some real opportunities here to mine this. So what my team have done is we've developed a mission within life sciences to say, okay, well, we want to bring digital thinking to core imaging and life sciences, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So of course, I've talked about, here's our core product. This is an example of just FTG, for example. Just I'm going to speak in general terms. I'm not going to speak specifically about our products. But the next sort of digital play on top of that is, of course, to quantify that in some way. So you could, for example, look at the SUVR of that PET image, or change over time. You can then, as the next sort of digital enhancement, look at, well, what differentiation can we pull from this? So how does our patient, for example, compare to a normal patient population? To take that further, you get into things like prognosis. And I just have an example here of a website I went to, and you can find out your risk score for, I think it's stomach cancer, which mine appears to be quite high, but that was just dummy data, so don't worry about me. It should be okay for that one, I hope. And so this is kind of the direction we could head into. Those are the kind of the high value opportunities we can develop quite quickly with clean data sets. So, but of course, there's a number of tools we need to put into place to really leverage this. And that includes actually a culture change. So we need to move from a very traditional culture to a digital culture. So some people, in a more traditional culture, their first thought is, well, we need a website. That's what we need to build. That's digital. But of course, as you all know, we want to go well beyond that. We want to think about managing disruption, enhancing core products, as I mentioned. So one thing we put in place is a pipeline to evaluate projects. So people can, for example, email us on innovate@ge.com, and we can then start to formulate strategies on ideas we think are maybe going to have high impact. We can then seek out funding. So we try to break away from traditional funding cycles so that we can move quickly, we can test ideas quickly. And now we're talking about projects on the order of 6 months to a year, opposed to 15 years. So it's a very different mindset, you can imagine. Getting your project managers to move from one way of thinking to a complete new way of thinking. So we develop up minimum viable products or concepts, proof of concepts, and then we say, are these technically feasible? Is there customer benefit? Is the business model make sense? Is there freedom to operate with regards to IP? If not, maybe we rework the strategy, then maybe it works. If not, we pause the project until maybe, because I say pause because the conditions might change. You might want to bring it back to life at some stage, or you might want to emerge with your strategy either within your department or elsewhere in the business, which has happened in the past as well. Oh, I didn't know this had, oops. There we go. Let's go right to it. So I mentioned customer very quickly. I had it quite late in this pipeline. Okay, I don't get to the customer until we actually have funding. That doesn't really happen in reality. Of course, you want your customer story kind of brought into it fairly early. So that's not completely accurate of how we do it. But one model that is really great to follow for understanding what your customer needs is basing it on what I've used is the Harvard Business School model for disruptive strategy, which is focusing on the job to be done. The idea here is if you understand your customer well enough and you always aim to satisfy the job that they're trying to do, you get repeat business, you fend off disruption. How do you do that? You make sure that the experience, you understand what experience they expect when they're using your product. You know how to integrate their product into their workflow or into their solution with features they require, and there's aspects of brand management as well. So for example, for quantitative software, your job to be done might be to quantify and assist in the interpretation of uptake, tracer uptake, especially for borderline cases, for example. There might be functional needs and emotional needs. For example, it might be that you want to make sure you reduce subjectivity and increase clinicians' confidence. Functionally, there might be, it has to be timely processing, has to be robust and accurate. And then of course you'll have more technical integration requirements that might be, well, some of them are technical, some are non-technical, excuse me. They might have to be DICOM compliant, but on the other hand, you might just have to think to yourself, hang on, who's going to sell this at the end of the day? Bring it back to a question that came up earlier about how do you actually integrate this within a business process. And it's really important to do these at the right time. For example, if you don't have your sales team incentivized and able to sell both a hardware product and a software product at the same time, they might push one over the other and you accidentally kill off your newly innovated software product. So not a huge surprise, especially to the audience here today. Machine learning is great, deep learning also great, and now is a great time to be involved in that. So I won't go into that too much further. I hope that you're all fairly convinced on that point by being here. If not, speak to Ben Glocker a bit later. In terms of software development strategy, this needs to be in place as well. This also ties to another question earlier, I believe, in that quite often we spend a lot of time in R&D firming up relationships and leveraging proof of concept type work, and that's really important, but it's very important to have a long-term strategy in thinking of how are you going to go past tens of patients to hundreds of patients, or thousands if it's machine learning. How are you going to perform on varied data sets? How are you going to translate that into commercial grade software with a proper quality management system? What's your registration route going to be? Are you going to go 510K or de novo route? And if you need to run further specific clinical studies in order to support your work or prove your work. And lastly, sorry, not quite fitting in the box, is in any post-marketing activities that you might have to follow up on as well. So here's a snapshot of my team. This is me, the young geeky guy in the corner here that is a little bit sensitive and awkward. No, I'm just joking. This is obviously, I'm obviously John Luke here. Well, okay, maybe not. So I'm somewhere in between. But this is the kind of team you need to really deliver on a project. You need a team that's adaptive, multidisciplinary, has clear roles and responsibilities, capable of doing horizontal working, not command and control type models, has distributed authority, and it is able to I have plant in here, of course, that's not quite right. So your work dictates your plan. You don't have a plan that dictates your work. This is all parts of agile working. If you're not familiar with agile working, it's kind of a behavioral system, and then you have methods like Scrum to deliver software products or just product management generally, and that's more specific methodology of how you do that. Sorry, I'm going as fast as I can here. You probably can tell. So, of course, just to get into the iterative work style that is really supported for these types of projects is you have, of course, your vision at first, and then you have multiple iterations. And these are really important with the agile way of working, that you want to have a fail-fast mentality. You want to test ideas quickly. And it's very often that your funding should follow a model like this as well that's supportive of this. If someone gives you a huge pot of money up front to develop up a product, very often what happens is at the very end of the project you come back and you say, oh, this is what we built, but it turns out to be that they wanted this. We believe the client wanted this, and if we don't have an iterative process to get feedback, it might have turned out they actually wanted a castle like this and we had no idea. We built something completely different. So that's kind of in a nutshell why we're doing these products, how we're doing these products. And in the near term, we have our first proof of concept to be presented in 2017 in November, which is why I haven't gone into specifics today, so sorry about that. And in the midterm, we want to establish a pipeline, looking at various of our assets that this sort of digital projects can tie to. And in the future, what do we want to get to? We want to entice new customers. We want to encourage repeat business. So it really comes back to a business model that should be evident. Our impact should be evident by enticing new business and fending off disruption as well as part of the main objectives here. Also another output that what could be an outcome of this. It would be amazingly to have digital companion diagnostics, which we might hear a little bit about later, I think, as well, and also digital biomarkers associated with our tracer products. So that's kind of where we would absolutely love to get to. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for a very interesting, dynamic presentation. I also suggest to shift talks for your presentation to the lunch break, if you don't mind, Chris. Okay. Thank you. Let's thank Chris again.